The Empire had ruled the stars for 300 years. Their ships were massive and black, built like floating mountains of metal and death. Their armies had crushed 17 different species across the galaxy. Planets burned when they arrived. Civilizations ended when they left. No one had ever defeated them. No one had ever escaped their hunger for power. Commander stood on the bridge of his warship, the Iron Dominion, and looked out at the stars with cold, yellow eyes. He was tall even for a with gray-scaled skin and 4 arms folded behind his back. He had served the Empire for 60 years. He had watched worlds fall. He had never known fear. But lately, something had been bothering him, something he would never admit to anyone. The whispers had started 3 years ago. Patrol ships going silent in the outer sectors. Supply convoys disappearing without a trace. At first, the High Council blamed pirates or equipment failures, but the losses kept growing. And then the survivors started talking. They spoke of a ship that came from nowhere, a vessel that appeared out of the darkness between stars, struck with weapons that burned through shields like they were made of paper, and vanished before help could arrive. The few who escaped described it the same way every time. A human ship, a dreadnought covered in scars and strange markings, a ghost from a dead species. The Revenant, they called it. Did not believe in ghosts. The humans were dead. The Empire had made sure of that 200 years ago. He had studied the records himself. Earth had burned for 3 months. Every colony had been found and destroyed. Every refugee ship had been hunted down. The humans were gone, erased from the galaxy like a stain wiped from glass. And yet the whispers continued. His orders had brought him here to the system. Once, this had been the human. Now it was a dead rock, its surface still by the orbital bombardment that had ended human civilization. The Empire kept it as a monument, a reminder to other species of what happened to those who resisted. 30 warships followed the Iron Dominion through the darkness. It was more firepower than they needed for a simple patrol mission, but the High Council was nervous. Too many ships had been lost in this sector. Too many questions remained unanswered. Intended to find answers. The censor officer, a young named, looked up from her console with confusion on her face. She had detected an energy signature near the planet's shattered moon. It was faint, almost invisible, but it was there. Ordered the fleet to investigate. His ships moved in formation, weapons charging, sensors scanning the void. They found nothing but debris and dust. The moon was broken into 1,000,000 pieces, the remains of some ancient catastrophe. There was nowhere for an enemy to hide. And then the sun began to rise. Prime was a dead world, but it still orbited its star. As the fleet waited near the moon's remains, light crept across the darkness, pushing back the shadows that had hidden the void for so long. Saw it first. Something massive moving in the shadow of the largest moon fragment. Something that had been there all along, silent and still, waiting with the patience of the dead. The Revenant emerged from the darkness like a nightmare taking form. It was 5 kilometers long, bigger than any human ship the records had ever described. Its hull was, and patched, covered in armor that looked like it had been welded on piece by piece over many years. Strange symbols marked its surface, words in a language did not recognize. And its weapons, dozens of them, were already glowing with power. Had 17 seconds to understand what he was seeing. The first shot took out 3 of his ships at once. A beam of white fire cut through their shields like they did not exist, through their armor like it was cloth, through their reactors until they exploded in balls of silent flame. Shouted orders, his fleet scrambled to respond, but the Revenant was not alone. More ships appeared from the debris field, dozens of them, human vessels of all sizes, rising from hiding spots in the broken moon, in the asteroid belts, in the dark spaces where no one had thought to look. They had been waiting here in the graveyard of there for a very long time. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Ships were powerful, but they had been built to fight enemies who stood in neat lines and followed predictable strategies. The humans fought like nothing had ever seen. They moved like a pack of hunting animals, each ship covering for the others, striking from angles that should have been impossible. Their weapons were not human designs from 2 centuries ago. They were something new, something that burned through technology like fire through dry wood. Watched his fleet die around him. 8 ships in the first 3 minutes, 12 more in the next 5. His commanders screamed for orders, but there were no orders that could save them. The humans were faster, smarter, and far more angry than anything they had ever faced. The Iron Dominion shook as enemy fire tore through its shields. Warning lights flashed across every console. The hull groaned like a dying animal. Managed to reach the communication console. His claws trembled as he opened a channel to the High Council, a channel that would carry his words across 1,000 light-years to the heart of the Empire. The Revenant filled his now. It was close enough that he could see individual weapon ports, each one glowing with the promise of death. Close enough that he could read the words painted on its hull in human script. He did not know what they meant, but he would remember them forever. "We remember Earth." Commander spoke his final words to the Empire. His voice was steady because he was a soldier, and soldiers did not show fear. But his hearts were pounding, and his mind was filled with a terrible understanding. The humans were not dead. They had never been dead. They had been hiding in the darkness, watching the Empire, learning its weaknesses, building their strength year after year after year. And now they had returned. "Send everything," said. "Send everything you have." The Revenant's forward batteries fired. The Iron Dominion died in a flash of light brighter than the rising sun. And across the galaxy, the Empire heard the impossible news. The ghosts were real, the humans were alive. And war had begun. 200 years before the battle Captain Vance had watched her world die. She stood on the bridge of the Revenant, hidden in the shadow of Earth's moon, and watched the fleet descend on her like a swarm of locusts. There were thousands of them, so many that they blocked out the stars. Their weapons fired in waves, turning the blue and green planet below into a ball of fire and smoke. Was 43 years old. She had served in the United Earth Navy for 20 years. She had a husband in London and a daughter in Singapore. She would never see either of them again. The communication channels were filled with screaming, cities calling for help that would never come, military bases reporting their final moments, civilian ships trying to escape only to be cut down by interceptors. And then, one by one, the voices went silent. Earth burned for 3 months. When it was over, nothing remained but ash and memory. Did not cry. There would be time for tears later if she survived. Right now she had a mission. The Revenant was humanity's last secret. It had been built in the hollowed core of an asteroid, far from any shipping lanes, invisible to every sensor that possessed. The project had taken 40 years and consumed the resources of 3 nations. Only a handful of people had known it existed. It was humanity's insurance policy, a final hope against the darkness. 12,000 people slept in the ship's cryogenic chambers, soldiers and scientists, engineers and artists, teachers and children. They had been chosen carefully, selected to represent everything humanity had been and everything it could still become. They were the last of their kind. Had received her final orders as the fleet entered Earth's orbit. The message was short, sent from a bunker deep beneath the Swiss Alps moments before it was destroyed. Prometheus Protocol authorized. Survive, remember, return. She had watched her world burn, and she had made a promise to the dead. The Revenant slipped away into the darkness between stars, carrying the last hope of humanity into an uncertain future. 200 years later, Captain Maya Vance stood on the same bridge, looking at the same stars. Maya was granddaughter. She had been born on the Revenant, raised in its metal corridors, trained from childhood for the mission that defined her family's legacy. She was 87 years old, though the cryogenic sleep had kept her body young. She had spent 40 of those years awake, fighting a war that they refused to believe existed. The ship around her had changed. The original Revenant had been impressive, but 2 centuries of work had transformed it into something else entirely. Human engineers had studied every piece of technology they could find, taken it apart, understood it, and improved upon it. The weapons that lined the ship's hull were not purely human or purely. They were something new, something that combined the best of both and exceeded either. And the Revenant was no longer alone. Maya looked at the holographic display floating before her command chair. 47 ships appeared on the screen, scattered across 3 star systems. Some were human vessels built in secret shipyards hidden in asteroid belts. Others were captured ships, repaired and modified by human hands. Each one was crewed by survivors, by the children and of those who had escaped the genocide 2 centuries ago. 90,000 humans lived among those ships, 90,000 ghosts waiting for their moment to return. The decades had not been easy. The first generation had struggled just to survive, hiding from patrols, rationing food and air and hope. Many had wanted to surrender, to accept that humanity was beaten and beg the Empire for mercy. Vance had refused. She had gathered the survivors together and spoken to them with fire in her eyes. "We are not beaten," she had said. "We are not broken. We are angry, and one day we will make them pay for every life they took." She had died at the age of 91, still fighting, still planning, still believing that humanity would rise again. Her daughter had continued her work, and now her granddaughter stood ready to finish it. Maya touched a control on her chair. A communication channel opened, connecting her to every ship in the hidden fleet. "All commanders, report status," she said. The responses came quickly, ships powered and ready, weapons charged, crews at battle stations. Everyone knew what was coming. They had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Maya thought about her grandmother, about the promise had made as Earth burned around her. She thought about the 12,000 sleeping souls who had been entrusted to the Revenant's care, who had woken to find themselves the last remnants of a dead civilization. She thought about all the years of hiding, of running, of watching the spread across the galaxy like a disease. The hiding was over now. A new message appeared on her display. Their scouts had confirmed what the fleet had long suspected. A task force was approaching Prime, humanity's dead. 30 warships, coming to investigate the strange signals that the hidden fleet had been deliberately broadcasting for months. It was a trap. The humans had laid it carefully, patiently, knowing that this arrogance would eventually bring them to this place. The Empire believed humans were extinct. They would not expect an ambush in the graveyard of a species they thought they had destroyed. Maya stood and walked to the front of the bridge, looking out at the stars through the main viewport. Somewhere out there, beyond the darkness, lay the Empire. 1,000 worlds ruled by fear and violence. 17 conquered species living as slaves under alien masters. The humans could not defeat such an empire alone. Maya knew that. But this battle was not about defeating it was about something more important. It was about showing the galaxy that resistance was possible. She returned to her command chair and opened the fleet-wide channel one last time. "All ships," she said, her voice carrying across the void to every human vessel hiding in the darkness. "Dawn Protocol is now active. Today, we remind the galaxy that humanity still breathes." The Revenant's engines roared to life. Around it, 46 other ships did the same. The ghosts of Earth moved toward their dead, ready to announce their return in fire and blood. The long sleep was finally over. The battle at Prime lasted 11 minutes. In that short time, 30 warships were reduced to burning debris, and the galaxy changed forever. News of the disaster spread through the Empire like wildfire. Commander's final transmission reached the High Council within hours, carried across 1,000 light-years by the fastest communication relays the possessed. The council members listened to his words with disbelief, then horror, then a cold and terrible fury. The humans were alive. They had been hiding for 2 centuries, watching and waiting, and now they had struck at the very place the Empire had chosen as a monument to human extinction. The insult was unbearable. The threat was unthinkable. High Admiral received his orders within a day of the battle. He was the greatest military commander that had ever produced, a strategist who had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds and never known defeat. The Council gave him a simple mission. Find the humans, destroy them, leave no survivors this time. Assembled a fleet of 500 warships, the largest force deployed since the conquest of the 60 years ago. He expected the hunt to be difficult. The humans had proven they could hide in places the Empire had never thought to look. Finding them would take time and patience. He did not expect them to come to him. 3 weeks after the battle the human fleet appeared in the system, just 2 light-years from the Empire's capital world. There were 50 ships now, their numbers grown by vessels that had emerged from hiding places across the sector. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, their weapons already charging. Admiral had been hunting ghosts. The ghosts had decided to hunt him instead. The fleet moved to intercept. 500 ships against 50. The numbers should have guaranteed victory, had crushed larger enemies with smaller forces. He expected the humans to run, to scatter back into the darkness where they had hidden for so long. Captain Maya Vance had other plans. The human fleet did not retreat. It did not form defensive lines or try to fight a conventional battle. Instead, it did something that no enemy had ever done against the. It attacked. The human ships screamed forward at maximum acceleration, their formations shifting and changing like a flock of birds in flight. They did not move in straight lines. They twisted and turned, their courses unpredictable, their targets constantly changing. Gunners tried to track them and failed. Their targeting computers had been designed to fight enemies who moved in orderly patterns. The humans moved like chaos given form. The first wave of human ships punched through the center of the formation like a knife through cloth. Their weapons fired in concentrated bursts, multiple ships focusing their fire on single targets. Warships that could shrug off damage from enemy fleets died in seconds under the concentrated assault. Admiral shouted orders from his command ship. He tried to reorganize his fleet, to bring his superior numbers to bear. But the humans never stayed still long enough to be surrounded. They struck and retreated, pulling his formation apart piece by piece. The Revenant led every charge. The massive dreadnought had been upgraded beyond recognition over 2 centuries, its hull reinforced with captured armor, its weapons enhanced with technology the Empire had never seen. It carved through's fleet like a blade, leaving destruction in its wake. Maya Vance stood on the bridge, her hands steady on the controls, her eyes fixed on the battle unfolding around her. She had studied tactics for 40 years. She knew how they thought, how they reacted, how they failed. Every move her fleet made exploited a weakness the Empire did not know it had. They were powerful, but they were also arrogant. They had conquered 17 species by overwhelming force and superior technology. They had never faced an enemy that fought differently than expected. They had never faced an enemy that had spent 200 years learning their every flaw. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 200 warships had been destroyed. The human fleet had lost only 7. Admiral survived. His command ship was crippled but intact, drifting through a field of debris that had once been the pride of the military. He watched the human fleet withdraw, not retreating in fear, but pulling back with the calm confidence of predators who had finished their hunt. A communication signal reached his broken bridge. A human face appeared on his screen, a woman with gray eyes and short dark hair. She looked at him with an expression he had never seen on a conquered species before. She looked at him like an equal. "My name is Captain Maya Vance," she said. "My grandmother watched your empire destroy our world. She made a promise that day. I am here to keep it." Said nothing. What could he say? His fleet was in ruins around him. Everything he had believed about human inferiority had been proven wrong in the most painful way possible. Maya continued, "Tell your High Council this. We are not the weak species you thought you exterminated. We are not the primitive civilization your histories describe. We are humanity. We adapt. We overcome. We remember." She leaned forward, her eyes burning with 2 centuries of rage. "And we are just getting started." The transmission ended. The human fleet vanished into faster-than-light travel, leaving Admiral alone with the wreckage of his ambitions. He sent his report to the High Council that night. It was the most difficult message he had ever written. He told them the truth, because lies would not save the Empire now. The humans were not just surviving, they were not just fighting back, they were winning. And somewhere in the darkness of space, the ghosts of Earth were planning their next strike. The war had truly begun. The news of the human victory spread across the galaxy like a spark touching dry grass. They tried to stop it. They blocked communication channels, arrested anyone caught sharing the story, and threatened death to those who spoke of the ghost fleet. But information has a way of finding cracks in even the strongest walls. Within weeks, every conquered species in the Empire had heard the impossible truth. The humans had returned, and they were winning. On Prime, a world that had been under rule for 90 years, an old woman sat in her tiny room and wept. Her name was Eldest Mora, and she was one of the last who remembered life before the conquest. She remembered the ships that had come to her world when she was young, offering trade and friendship. Human ships, crewed by strange, soft-skinned beings who smiled too much and asked endless questions about everything. They had come 20 years later. They had burned the human trading posts first, then turned their weapons on the... Mora had watched her civilization fall, her people reduced to slaves serving alien masters. She had believed hope was dead. Now she held a small communication device in her trembling hands, listening to a recording that had been passed from person to person across 1,000 light years. A human voice, speaking words that made her old heart pound. "You are not alone. You were never alone." Mora had thought she had no tears left. She was wrong. Similar scenes played out across the Empire. On the factory world of Seven, workers gathered in secret meetings and whispered about rebellion for the first time in generations. On the agricultural planet of, farmers began hiding food instead of giving it all to their overseers. On 100 different worlds, species that had accepted their defeat began to remember what it felt like to hope. Captain Maya Vance understood something that the Never had. Humanity alone could not defeat an empire of 1,000 worlds. The Ghost Fleet was powerful, but it was still small. 100 ships now, after more survivors had emerged from hiding. 100 ships against an empire that could field hundreds of thousands. But they had enemies everywhere. They had conquered 17 species and turned billions of beings into slaves. Those slaves had been broken and obedient for generations. They had forgotten how to fight. They needed to be reminded. Maya broadcast her message from the bridge of the Revenant, standing before cameras that would carry her words across the stars. She spoke simply, in the common trade language that most species understood. "For 200 years, she said, they have told you that resistance is impossible, that their rule is forever, that hope is a weakness for the foolish and the young." She paused, letting her words sink in. "They were wrong. We are proof that they were wrong. They tried to destroy us completely. They burned our world, hunted our survivors, and told the galaxy that humanity was dead. But we did not die. We hid in the darkness and we survived. We watched them believe their own lies and we grew stronger. Now we return their fire 100-fold." Maya stepped closer to the camera. Behind her, the bridge of the Revenant hummed with activity. Officers monitored communications from across the sector. Weapons systems stood ready. The Ghost Fleet waited for her command. "But this is not just our fight," she continued. "They have taken everything from all of us. Our worlds, our freedom, our futures. They have ruled through fear for 3 centuries. They believe that fear will keep them safe forever." Her voice hardened. "Let us show them how wrong they are." Maya spread her hands. "Rise with us, fight with us. You do not need warships or advanced weapons. Sabotage their factories, hide their supplies, protect those who resist. Every small act of defiance weakens them. Every spark can start a fire." She straightened, her gray eyes blazing with determination. They built their empire on the belief that conquered species will always stay conquered, that enough violence will crush any spirit, that hope can be killed. She shook her head slowly. They were wrong. Hope cannot be killed. It can be buried, hidden, forced into the shadows, but it always survives, and when it emerges again, it burns brighter than ever before. Maya raised her fist, a gesture that meant the same thing in a dozen different cultures. "Rise with us, and we will burn this empire to ash together." The message ended, but its effects were just beginning. Within days, the first reports of rebellion reached command centers. A communications array destroyed on Prime. A weapons factory sabotaged on 7. A patrol ambushed by farmers on, their bodies found with human words carved into the ground beside them. "We remember." The Empire responded with overwhelming force. Troops flooded rebellious worlds. Public executions became common. They believed that enough blood would restore order, just as it always had before. But this time was different. This time, the conquered species were not alone. Human ships appeared without warning to strike at military bases. They brought weapons and supplies to resistance fighters, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They turned the Empire's size into a weakness, forcing them to spread their forces across 1,000 fronts. And with every victory, more species joined the uprising. They brought their old generation ships out of hiding, massive vessels that had carried their people between stars before the conquest. They were not warships, but they could carry fighters and supplies where they were needed most. They offered their knowledge of technology, gained through generations of forced labor in enemy factories. Other species contributed what they could, each adding their strength to the growing rebellion. Captain Maya Vance watched the alliance grow and felt something she had rarely allowed herself to feel. Hope. Her grandmother had made a promise as Earth burned: survive, remember, return. Maya had added a fourth word to that promise, spoken quietly in the darkness of her quarters as she planned the next phase of the war. Free. The Ghost Fleet was no longer alone. A coalition of the conquered was forming around it, united by rage and hope and the memory of everything that had taken from them. The final battle was coming, and when it arrived, the Empire would face something it had never encountered before. A galaxy that had finally remembered how to fight back. The Battle of Prime began on a morning when 3 suns rose over the Empire's capital world. 400,000 warships had gathered to defend there. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history, a wall of metal and weapons that stretched across the void like a second sky. The High Council had stripped every sector of its defenses, called in every reserve, summoned every ship that could fly and fight. This would be the final battle that would crush the rebellion here, destroy the human Ghost Fleet, and restore order to their empire. They had no doubt of victory. How could they lose? They had the numbers, the firepower, the 3 centuries of conquest that proved their superiority. They did not understand what they were facing. The Allied fleet arrived at dawn. 300 human ships led the formation, the Ghost Fleet grown far beyond its original 47 vessels as survivors emerged from every corner of space. Behind them came the and their generation ships, massive vessels converted to carry thousands of fighters. The followed-in mining craft rebuilt for war, their hulls reinforced with stolen armor. A dozen other species filled the formation, each bringing what they had, each fighting for everything they had lost. 100,000 ships in total, less than a quarter of the numbers. Captain Maya Vance stood on the bridge of the Revenant and looked at the enemy fleet filling her. She was calm. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. "All ships," she said across the Allied communication network. "This is Captain Vance. Today we end 300 years of rule. Today we free the galaxy." She paused, letting her words reach every vessel in the Allied formation. "They have more ships, they have more weapons. They believe their numbers make them invincible." She smiled, a cold expression that held no humor. "They are wrong. We have spent 2 centuries learning how they think, how they fight, how they fail. We know their weaknesses better than they know themselves." Maya gripped the arms of her command chair. "All ships initiate Omega pattern. Show them what we learned in the dark." The Allied fleet moved. To observers, what followed made no sense. The enemy formation shattered into hundreds of smaller groups that scattered in every direction. They seemed to be fleeing, breaking apart in panic before the battle had even begun. Commanders laughed and ordered pursuit. Their massive fleet surged forward to hunt down the scattered rebels. It was exactly what Maya had planned. The human ships were not fleeing. They were leading. Each small group drew a portion of the fleet after it, pulling the massive enemy formation apart like fingers separating strands of hair. The commanders did not realize what was happening until it was too late. The scattered groups led their pursuers into carefully prepared kill zones. Fighters swarmed from hidden positions in asteroid fields. Ships emerged from behind moons and debris clouds. The hunters became the hunted as Allied forces struck from every direction at once. They tried to regroup. They sent orders for their scattered ships to fall back to defensive positions, but the Allied fleet never gave them the chance. Every time the enemy tried to form a line, human ships would strike at the weakest point and break it apart. Every time commanders tried to coordinate their forces, hackers would jam their communications. The battle raged for 19 days. 19 days of constant fighting across the system. Ships died by the thousands on both sides. Space itself seemed to burn with weapons, fire, and exploding reactors. The 3 suns of Prime rose and set again and again, while the fate of the galaxy was decided in the void above. They fought with the desperation of an empire facing extinction. They were not cowards. They had ruled the stars for 3 centuries. They threw everything they had at the Allied fleet, wave after wave of attacks that would have crushed any normal enemy. But the Allied fleet was not normal. It was held together by something they had never understood. Hope. They fought because they remembered the world they had lost 90 years ago. They fought because their children had been born in slavery and deserved to know freedom. Every species in the Alliance fought for something they had tried to destroy and failed. On the 15th day, the Allied fleet broke through the defensive perimeter and entered orbit around the capital world. On the 17th day, the High Council bunker was destroyed by precision strikes from the Revenant itself. On the 19th day, the surviving commanders broadcast their surrender. Captain Maya Vance accepted the surrender aboard the Revenant, in the same bridge where her grandmother had once watched Earth burn. Representatives from every Allied species stood with her, beings who had been slaves and had become warriors, who had been defeated and had learned to win. The delegation knelt before her, their gray-scaled skin pale with shock and fear. They had ruled the galaxy for 300 years. They had never imagined this moment was possible. Maya looked down at them with gray eyes that held 2 centuries of fury and grief and determination. But when she spoke, her voice was calm. "They believed they had killed us," she said. Her words were broadcast to every corner of the former empire, to every world that had suffered under rule, to every being who had ever dreamed of freedom. They were wrong. Humanity does not die easily, and neither does hope. She gestured to the representatives standing behind her, and all the others who had joined the rebellion. This victory does not belong to humanity alone. It belongs to everyone who refused to accept defeat, everyone who kept hope alive in the darkness, everyone who rose up when they were told that rising was impossible. Maya turned to look out the viewport at the stars, the same stars her grandmother had watched from the dark side of Earth's moon 200 years ago, the same stars that had witnessed the death of her world and the birth of its vengeance. "This galaxy is free now," she said. "Let no one forget what we achieved together. Let no one forget that even in the longest night, dawn always comes." She straightened, and her voice rang with the weight of history. "My grandmother made a promise when Earth died. Survive, remember, return. Today that promise is fulfilled." Behind her, through the viewport, the three sons of Prime rose over the horizon, their light falling on a universe that would never be the same. The ghosts had become legends, the conquered had become liberators, and humanity, the species that should have died 200 years ago, had led a galaxy to freedom. The war was over. The dawn had finally come. And across 1,000 worlds, beings of 100 different species looked up at the stars and spoke a word they had almost forgotten. "Free."